Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Abrams. Thank you for being here. We're really excited about our guest today. A couple quick notes before we start. One is this is a live stream, so we're going to take questions at the end. There is a chat feature. Feel free to add your comments, your questions to the chat, and we will take them at the end. You can add them throughout the whole thing. And so let's get started. I want to introduce our guest. Today we have Apolo Anton Ohno. Apolo is the most decorated U.S. Winter Olympian of all time, winning 8 Olympic medals during his career. He's also a successful sports broadcaster and television personality, a New York Times bestselling author, and he was the season 4 Dancing with the Stars champion. So welcome, Apolo.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to digitally be connecting with everybody during this time. So I really appreciate it. I know this has been an ongoing conversation we've been having for quite some time, and finally made it happen. So I'm grateful for that.
I'm excited to chat with you today, and I do want to kick things off. I know we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I want to kick things off with the beginning of your career, because I think what I read was really interesting was that you didn't actually start your career speed skating, and you were a state champion swimmer. So how did you transition from the pool to the ice and end up, reaching the highest level of your sport?
So I grew up in the Seattle Pacific Northwest region. I was raised by a single parent, a Japanese immigrant. My father came to the U.S. when he was about 17 years old. When I was born, my dad had a tremendous challenge of trying to figure out what to do with all this excess energy. And the only thing that he knew of besides traditional academic route was, I'm going to place this kid into every single sport imaginable. And so I played all sports as a kid. And that was the kind of catalyst to me recognizing, I think, my love and passion for just being active in general. And so he had thrown me into the pool. I played traditional stick and ball sports, all the American kind of football, baseball, basketball, track and field. I really excelled for some reason at the sport of swimming. And I didn't have a lot of time to practice. My father would drop me off at the pool and I would kind of mess around. And I actually was excelling very, very quickly in the sport of swimming. But I didn't love it. I didn't really have a great time swimming. I actually was advancing so quickly that they had placed me with a community college training team twice a week. And so here I was at the age of 12 training with grown kind of young men and women who were 18, 19, 20, 21 years old in the pool. And I remember this one time the coach was essentially like, Apolo, there's no talking for the next 3 hours of this training session. So I was like a 12, 13-year-old. That was a big kind of like, it really hurt me emotionally, because I would just basically sing to myself underneath the water during these training sessions. And that was my kind of first entrance into the world of sport. And then from there, because on the weekends, Seattle, anyone who's ever been, it rains frequently, especially in the fall and winter. So on Friday and Saturdays, he would drop me off at the local roller skating rink. And this was the place at the time that we would go and hang out. It was a safe atmosphere. My father knew that, I couldn't get into too much trouble at the time. And that's where I learned how to roller skate. And then, every single Friday night or Saturday night session, they would have, okay, now it's speed skating, time. And there's like 2 minutes of people just like racing around this. And I somehow was very drawn into the speed of that roller skating, inline skating world, began that process, and then first saw short track speed skating in 1992. And again in 1994, when I was watching the Olympics with my father. And that's when I was really, really just intrigued at a level that I've never seen a sport that was so awkward and new, but also looked impossible on television, right? Because you had these athletes leaning at these impossible angles, going 35 plus miles an hour on one leg. The blade looked like a samurai sword that was 1 millimeter thick, and they were just racing each other inside of this hockey rink. And I was like, wow, that looks amazing. And so that was that was the spark that started my interest into the world of the Olympic pursuit.
And so you at 13 went to full-time training.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, being, a young teenager and being into, trying to achieve the highest level of a sport versus just being a kid?
Well, it was a challenge, right? So at the age of 13 and 14 years old, at this point, I had been kind of locally competing in some small competitions in the world of short track speed skating. I was being recognized by some scouts, people who were essentially trying to find out who the next Olympic team member is going to be at that young age, and then pluck them out to go train in a junior development program in upstate New York at the Olympic Training Center in Lake Placid. And so at the age of 14, I was chosen a year earlier than they traditionally let athletes into the program to go train in this kind of structured program in upstate New York. So my life has never been normal, right? I mean, if you could imagine, I moved from Seattle all the way to upstate New York at the age of 14. I was living in basically a dormitory with other athletes that are much older than me. And I was forced to kind of grow up very quickly. Not only that, I made my first team at the age of 14. I was number one in the team at the age of 14. So now I'm technically the quasi captain of this team, but I can't go out and have a beer with anybody for like another 7 years, technically. Right. So it was a really interesting time, right? Where I was beating guys who had been to 2 Olympic Games already. They had dedicated their entire lives towards the sport. And it was, I imagine it's like a child actor in a sense, right? Like this child actor is really good, almost, is doing things that they shouldn't be doing at this age because they're just so good at it, but they don't even know because they're so naive. That's kind of what my realm was in the world of speed skating. And then as I started to understand what was happening, it was a different conversation, I think, introspectively.
So I want to get into your Olympic career, and your first Olympics was 2002 in Salt Lake City. And, it's kind of an interesting piece to take being on home turf.
Yeah.
And so you went from, a sport that is, not as widely known as a lot of the other winter sports, and you all of a sudden became the face of it. In the US at home, what was that transition like from going, to just, being the best to winning to all of a sudden being on, with sponsorship deals and everything that goes along with the fame?
So it's really crazy, right? So let me just explain it like this. In the Olympic world, you live in this very isolated, very kind of small bubble in which you're training year round, hours and hours per day around the same people. And then you all of a sudden, especially in a sport like mine, where most Americans didn't even know what the sport was pre-2002, and then you get into the spotlight during this one moment, and billions of people are watching this one event for 2 weeks long. Literally, the world is now watching this event only. This is back when there really wasn't a lot of content, right? So this was what people were watching and they were participating in. And then overnight, after winning my first medal, I was a household name in the United States. And so at the age of 18, 19 years old, I don't even understand what this even means. I don't even understand what to do. I have no idea to do anything outside of the sport in which my traditional kind of realm of expertise was. And then, you get thrown into the world of Dancing with the Stars and this whole process and sponsorships and interviews and people asking for your time and people asking for investment. And there's a whole influx of interesting possibilities and paranoia that occur after you win. And I don't think most athletes are ever prepared for this, specifically Olympic athletes, because there's no salary tied to any of the athletes. And so the reason why all of these athletes are actually competing is because they truly love the sport. And the metric that they're using to gauge the levels of success is this extrinsic kind of validation of, did you get gold, silver, or bronze, or make an Olympic team? And that process and understanding of this 4-year, 8-year journey for most athletes is very, very powerful. But it was a shock. I mean, I can't even tell you how quickly my life changed, literally overnight.
Yeah. And so, you just mentioned it's an 8-year journey for most people. I mean, for you went to 3 Olympics, and the last one, you kind of dramatically changed how you approached it with, your nutrition and eating and everything else. Like, how did you take all 3 Olympics differently and progress throughout that time as you were competing, at the highest level?
Yeah. So in my first Olympic Games, I was 19 years old, very strong physically. The sport had not started to evolve or change much. So you could be a bulkier athlete that was really rooted in kind of explosive, dynamic performance, looking much more like a track and field sprinter than someone who climbs mountains in the Tour de France, right? Where they've got this kind of skeletonized upper body frame, and they're essentially all engine with very little chassis. And then in 2006, the sport had started to become more sport specific, meaning all of the athletes who were competitive in 1998 and 2002 were no longer competitive because they had to strip away a lot of excess muscle mass up top, especially in the upper body. And then in 2010, the sport transformed, and the evolution again began, where athletes were dropping weight considerably. Your strength to weight ratio was very, very important to kind of be focused on. And so I had dropped, if just to give you a metric, in 2002, I was like 165, 167 in terms of my body weight, leg press around 1,400, 1,500 pounds. And then by the end of my career, I had dropped down to about 142 in terms of my body weight competing weight. And then I could leg press just shy of like 2,000 pounds. And so these elements of training were kind of across all countries. Everyone had started to become much more sports specific. Everyone wanted to kind of atrophy the upper body musculature so that you didn't have or didn't activate anything up top, and you really were just truly a sports specific athlete. So it was a grueling process to transform and change, not only psychologically how you approach the sport, but also physically and how your body would adapt, because there's obviously a genetic component to every sport. But I think that you can overcome that by some extreme training, which I was a big fan of.
So 3 Olympics later, you become the most decorated American Winter Olympian. When did you know it was time to move on from the sport, to retire and kind of focus on other passions?
So I never knew it was time to retire from the sport, from the Olympics. Instead, I made the decision in probably 2009 that this was most likely going to be my last Olympic Games. So this is my 3rd and final Olympic Games. And I was a very curious athlete and person. So I had many different interests and hunger and desire and insecurity to succeed outside of what traditionally was my realm of expertise. And along that process, I always say this is like the great divorce. Right. And I know we had talked about this before, but, the sole identity that which an athlete is tied to, this is the sole person, which is sport, that teaches you, that nourishes you, that gives you strength, shows you discipline and scheduling and potential for 15 years of your life. And then like this, the snap of a finger on day 17 of the Olympic Games, the day after closing ceremony, your first true love looks you in the eyes and says, no matter what you do, you're done. And so for some athletes, they decide to retire. Some athletes are retiring because if they're too old or they just have no choice. But that visceral, powerful experience is an ongoing one. And at that moment, you recognize when you wake up the next morning, there's no more coach, there's no more teammates, there's no more structure, there's no more training program. Physically, your body's producing less chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, all these great hormones that get released in your system because you're so healthy. Overnight, you stop producing them unless you continue along that path of physical training. So you've got this really challenging, violent breakup with your first true love that has shown you of who you are, right? I mean, when people ask me today, it's usually 2 things: Apollo Dancing with the Stars or Apollo the Olympic speed skater. And so that was a very big challenge for me because I felt like I was hungry to succeed outside of this world of the Olympic space. And I didn't want to use my accolades, experience, and strength to do so. I wanted to do so because I believed that I was strong enough and smart enough, like I could tackle any challenge or business and whatever, and I would have success. And it's been, the past 10 years has been a extremely powerful and transformative process of both understanding that my identity is not solely tied to one thing. The attributes that make up that identity path is what I'm really actually my true strength. That's my hammer, so to speak, right? Is the things that made me obsessive and compulsive and hyper-focused and very competitive. I could use those tools towards other avenues and paths, but I needed to find other areas which would draw me in the same way. So the process in the past 10 years has been very challenging. And I think I would liken it to a lot of people who either just leave their, their kind of structured college or university environment, or they're having to change careers altogether, or they're thrust into the career that now has new technologies that they're forced to use and they're not used to using them. They feel like maybe perhaps archaic in a way. And so I felt all of these emotions time and time again. And there was thousands and thousands of conversations that I had in my own mind of, am I good enough? What is my purpose? What do I want out of life? What does life want out of me? How do I still win? How do I reinvent? Is there a way that I can pivot out of the world of sport into something greater? What's truly important? And, even during this time right now, I have these conversations. And I just think that after this 10-year journey of being retired, I've been able to answer them with much more authority and conviction than ever before.
So what advice would you give to somebody that's going through this? I mean, not everyone's going at the Olympic athlete level, but there's a lot of pivoting and reinvention going on. So what did you learn in your 10 years of doing that you could, that you would tell somebody who's sitting in that kind of moment of truth where they're trying to make those decisions on what they could be thinking about or what they should be asking themselves?
Yeah. So I look, I'm no expert by any means. I simply, hopefully, my new life mission, and my life mission now, is to help people unlock their own inner strengths and potential in a way that I have experienced it through my own sport and in my life after, becoming more resilient, becoming more mentally adaptable, having a high performance mindset towards any area and facet of their life. And so the questions that I always, want people to ask themselves, especially right now, is those two questions: is what do you want out of life? And what do you think life wants out of you? And they can be entirely different answers. But I think it's important to have a very transparent and radically open conversation with yourself about the things that you deem to be the most important. And now is the perfect opportunity, amidst this incredible pandemic and crisis that we're all facing, is to have these in-depth conversations with yourself in a way that can be very productive, and to really help streamline, wipe away the noise, kind of clear the smoke in a sense, disengage for a second from the battlefield of your day-to-day activities, stress, anxiety, nervousness, uncertainty. And I always use the metaphor, climb onto the balcony, metaphorically speaking, right? And then on that balcony, because you're disengaged, because you're taking a moment and a breather to really see the full landscape. And what is the reason why you're here? What is the sole purpose that you believe that you have? And they don't have to be like these deeply profound reasons, right? They don't have to be something that is in deep depth of arts. Whatever the reasons are, it can be as simple as my family, my friends, my loved ones, happiness, fulfillment. But I think it's important to be open and transparent about that and have the conversation. And then I think after you determine what that is, you kind of recalibrate your focus. And being on that balcony allows you to see the battlefield in a way that you didn't when you were boots on the ground, right? You can only see what's in front of you and what's behind you and side to side when boots on the ground. You can't see beyond the horizon. And that's what going on the balcony, metaphorically speaking, allows you to do, is recalibrate your focus in a way that gives you a chance to recognize where you are at, where you'd like to go, who do you think that you are, and who would you like to be? And so whether it's June, July, August, and we're coming up out of this into the quasi new era, who is that person that you'd like? What is this experience going to help teach you and nurture you? And what positivity can you derive amidst this chaos, which will give you the rocket fuel to propel towards the things that you deem to be the most important? And so, I talk a lot about, it's a long answer, apologies, Mike. I talk a lot about this thing called the 5 golden principles. And these 5 golden principles are things that I believe that I have tried to embody in my life as an Olympic speed skater and in my life as a post-Olympic speed skater. And the first one is gratitude. Gratitude is very powerful in a number of different ways that we all recognize, but it also allows you to be extremely present, right? And being present means you no longer want, need, or dwell about the past. You're just here having this experience. You're grateful for your health. You're grateful for your family, your friends, your loved ones, for the opportunities, the challenges, the obstacles, all of those things. But grateful can be a very powerful motivating tool. The second one is give, or giving. And so whether that's through servant leadership, whether that is giving a friend a call, a text message, a nice note, smiling at someone through your mask if you're walking around, whatever that is, giving others in a way that can impact them subconsciously in a way that maybe you can't even recognize or even they even know at that moment in present time. But also giving yourself the chance and opportunity to be here today in this moment and understand that it is okay if you're feeling uncertain, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling scared. All of these things are natural human emotions, but also giving yourself and giving others the chance to progress towards a better version of this path that you're on. The third one is grit, one of my favorites. It's about the grind. It's about recognizing that this path and this process of life is never easy. There's easy times along this life chapter. But when you are able to embody and understand, hey, look, if I'm in a 100-chapter book and I'm on chapter 30 right now, how do I understand that grit and having that mindset? Like we were talking about Carol Dweck, an amazing kind of concept around having a growth mindset, having the grit, having the growth mindset, recognizing that you're not fixed, but also understanding that this process is not going to be easy and becoming okay with that. The human condition has survived and evolved biologically because it hasn't been easy. That's why we are so incredibly powerful and resilient. And so for those of you who are watching, this is your gift as a human being, is your ability to increase this grit, this grind, this ability to go beyond a certain fixed self, right? The fourth one is gearing up your personal expectations. And this is really targeting those who are looking to improve or reach a certain chapter in their book with the type of progress that they're seeking. And the only way that you can do that is by taking bold and aggressive action towards those goals that you set for yourself. And one way that I've found that really ties to the identity is when you have a gearing up of your personal expectation, a leveling up of your personal expectations, it makes you more accountable because these are things that you're tying to your identity. Just like when someone said, Apollo, didn't you ever get tired of going around in circles for 15 years doing the same thing over and over? And I would say, no, I didn't actually. That's who I am. So if you're able with time to overcome your previous preconditioned self into the new self in a way that takes time and consistency and practice, what that does is you're now training and rewiring your responses that are against the grain of the hardwired kind of preconditioned response you normally would have. And your new response to this challenge, to this obstacle, to this quitting of this habit, to losing weight, to getting better sleep, to eating healthier, whatever that is, you have to tie your identity to it and you have to increase the personal expectations. So instead of saying, I'm not like that because that's not who I am, instead recognizing and saying, perhaps that's not my natural strength, but I'm working at it and I'm progressing inch by inch on a daily basis. That's number 4. The last one, go. Get into action. You've done the analysis. You've done kind of the survey of what's happening on the battlefield. Now it's time to move, right? You have to get motion. Human beings are addicted to progress. We understand that about our psychology. When we taste little bits of progress, even when we're not doing something that we like, it's actually very inspiring. And it causes us to come back to the trough time and time again. So those are the five golden principles: gratitude, giving, grit, gearing up expectations, and get into action. Go.
So when you are in a time like now, how do you stay motivated every day? How do you get up and go every day? You have your 5 golden principles, but what else are you doing in the current situation to stay motivated? And what advice do you give to people with everything going on in the world now?
Yeah. So motivation is challenging, right? And it's something that either you're becoming inspired or motivated by the intrinsic motivations, which is the most powerful because these are things that they kind of pull you up out of bed in the morning. They keep you up late at night. And then there's the extrinsic kind of motivations, which usually come in the form of societal expectations, work expectations, etc. The way that I have dealt with it is the following. I remain hyper-focused on the deep purpose and reason and meaning of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And having these post-it notes that remind me of that are good visual cues and reminders. Now, some people who listen to motivational talks on, online and on YouTube or wherever they're getting their content, and they're consuming this information, the thing about the human being that we understand is that motivation purely from an extrinsic point of view will fade over time. And so you have to recognize this and understand that unless you can find something that you can tie to in terms of a meaning, a purpose, a response, it's going to be very challenging to remain constant throughout that theme. And consistency is always the best way to break any habit or form new ones. We understand that, right? I'm a big avid reader. I have Atomic Habits behind me. And I think that when we look at it that way, how do you stay motivated over a period of time? I think focusing on two things. One is not only about the result, right, which is a good metric to use because we need to gauge ourselves and have this self-audit. So for me in the sport world, it was, did I make the team? Am I in the right path? Am I progressing in my career? And the second part is focusing much more on the process. And the process is where this kind of growth mindset and this understanding of, if I can have enjoyment in this path and process, the result is going to be what it is, as long as I'm able to dedicate myself in my own capacities in doing so. There's something very powerful about knowing that we've exhausted all of our options in doing something. That's a very freeing possibility. It's just very challenging to get to. So enabling and creating an environment for yourself that gives you the best possible chance of success. For me, it's my morning routine. It's my sanctuary. It's the same thing that I do every single morning. And I ensure that nothing can disrupt that as much as possible. And so that is my anchor in the morning that prepares me to perform my best work, which also engages and primes my mind and body to say, hey, don't forget, Apollo, this is why you're doing what you're doing. And there's going to be days when you don't want to be there. There's going to be days when this is painful and it's a slog and it sucks. But there's a deeper, more personal meaning tied to this. And that is what keeps you consistent. And with that consistency comes an incredible amount of growth.
So kind of going back to something you said, and I think it relates to your 5 golden principles, but when you're on the balcony, someone like you gets offered a lot of different opportunities, game show host, Dance with the Stars, books. How do you decide what to take on? And to reach towards the goals that you talked about earlier, how do you kind of, when you're on the balcony, decide when you want to be back boots on the ground because you've got that perspective? What goes into that thought process of, is this opportunity going to help with my goal? And how do I decide what to take on and what not to take on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have taken on so many different projects and I would say paths in my career and life. But none of them were my natural strengths or expertise. So I think as I, for me personally, as I grow beyond the sport of short track speed skating, I look at everything in terms of just exactly what you said. Is what I'm doing today, is the most important thing the most important thing? Very simple kind of question and answer, right? Is this going to help and impact this streamlined approach towards what I'm focused on? So in the sport of short track speed skating, we developed a mindset called not an almond more, not an almond less. Talking about consumption of food. And because I was cutting so much weight and was so almost psychotic about the process, we looked at everything in kind of millimeter levels of performance. And so is this exercise, training, recovery, equipment, coach, is this in line with what the ultimate goal is moving forward? And if it's not, then it doesn't have a place in my life. I've struggled with that after the fact in my personal life after sport. One of the things I think that we look for when we're trying to make these better decisions in our life is having the self-audit, but also having the partner audit or having the business audit or having the understanding that maybe perhaps I go down this path and the next 4 years was not something that I did. And I can always look back on my life and many other people's lives and say, well, you could have, should have, would have done different things. But the most important thing here is to recognize, like, hey, is this a powerful learning experience? Was that failure or stumble or falling right on your face, What do you learn from it? How do you take from that in a way that can progress your life experience further? And so when I'm making the decision process now, I would say, especially in the past 3 years, I've become very laser focused on how does this help people in a way that lifts them up, that mentally gets them motivated, and creates a space where they go from the passenger seat in their life, in this world that's flying by them and life is happening to them, to getting into the driver's seat where they've always been the entire time. It's just a simple psychological shift, and recognizing I can't control all of the outcomes. That's okay. I'm going to streamline my focus, do true deep work on the things that really matter towards the goals and career paths or love and interests that I have. And from there, that's going to help me wipe away the noise. And that decision-making process is becoming very clear over the past several years for me, even more so, that I love connecting with human beings. I believe in human beings. I also recognize I see patterns that many of us have not been able to tap into, our inner most powerful strength, which is the place where we always forget to look. And that's between our own ears, right? Which is our mind.
So what's next for you? What else are you working on that we can look forward to coming from you to kind of go towards those goals?
So two things. Everything that I'm doing right now, Mike, is revolved around kind of the same centerpiece focus, which is helping people unlock their own inner potential. I call it the gold medal mindset, right? I'm just using it because of my experience as an Olympic athlete. And so everything that I'm doing now, whether it's this book that I'm writing that's soft titled called Hard Pivot, and it's really about this transition, reinvention, loss of identity, and newfound love and focus for the world and other humans. That's been my journey. And hopefully I can share insights from people who have figured out how to reinvent themselves multiple times in their existing career and in others. That book is really centered on those who are looking to have a new path and carve a new way in terms of getting back into the driver's seat. Doing a podcast, which is going to be starting hopefully in the next month or two. And that also is around the kind of mindset, understanding individuals and people and their stories about how they got to where they are at. What are the lessons learned, and a little bit more in-depth, kind of this deeper connection that we see we've seen this on many podcasts, but I'm really interested in the psychology and how the psychology ties with their upbringing. Like, what was the catalyst at the age of 10, 11, 12, 13 years old that led so-and-so hedge fund investor to be this world-renowned guy, and what's driving him? He has seemingly on the outside view everything he could possibly ever want. Why is he still at work every day at 7 a.m. till 7 p.m.? What is it? What is it? A chip on the shoulder? Is it an insecurity? Is it pure alpha drive and hunger to win? And how do we learn from that? How can I learn from that and apply it towards my own life? And that's what the kind of podcast, book, and others is about. And then I'm creating a digital curriculum. So I've had to pivot and reinvent myself, right? A lot of the time and the things that I do are spent either in workshops or they're in live in person, which I would have loved to do this with all of you live. Because I could feel your energy, you could see me, hear me, and we could really connect on a deeper level, but we don't have access to that. So because of that, I'm now turning, which is my home office behind me, into a digital studio to where I can create and recreate and duplicate some of the insights and the lessons learned. I'm working with some professors out of Carnegie Mellon on human behavior, mindfulness, meditation, psychology, data, statistics, on just formulating some evidence-based research for people to consume in a way that, hey, this is perhaps the way that you are. This is perhaps some reasons why. The beautiful thing is that you can change and you can get back into that driver's seat. So just like in sport, short track speed skating is a sport where you can run the same race 4 times and probably get 4 different winners. The difference between first place of winning gold, being celebrated around the world, and the guy who's crossing the line in 4th is that much of a difference. So hundreds, perhaps thousands of seconds go by where 4 people just cross the finish line. 8, 12 years of your life has been dedicated towards this one moment, and it's not entirely within your control. The thing that is I could have, if I had crossed 4th and not been celebrated, I could have said, oh, I'm bitter, I'm angry, I'm upset, my whole life was thrown away because I fell down or I didn't win. Or you can say, you know what? I'm in the driver's seat. That experience was powerful beyond belief. It was 0.001% of the entire world of population who even had a chance to go do that. What are the lessons learned here that I can apply? And by getting back in control of your day-to-day routine, which for me in the sport of short track speed skating was concentrating heavily on the elements that are within my control. And that meant mastering my day-to-day activities, my dedication, my effort level, and relying much more upon discipline than motivation, passion, drive, anything else, and saying that no matter how I feel emotionally, I am sticking to the mission. My mission is to make sure that I can compound the smallest amount of details and things done on a daily basis. So at the end of the year, when you add all those days and hours and minutes up, you've got something truly valuable and special that perhaps others didn't have the chance to. So dissecting your routine and your life in a way doesn't have to be as hardcore, but I do believe if you want to have real change and you want to have real progress in the way that you see the world, in the way that you interact with the world, you've got to go and shift from being in that high-speed train passenger to getting an understanding that you are the conductor. You are holding the pen in your hand. You are writing your own music. Sometimes it doesn't play the way that you intend it to, but you can write in every chapter of your life book the way that you would want it to happen. And your left foot in front of your right foot, moving, getting into action, that is in your control. And so if you are the conductor of your own life, if you are writing your own movie hero story, why not write a spectacular one? Why not fill it with the superhero tendencies and strengths that we all aspire to be? No one is stopping you from doing that. No one. Everything that you and how you perceive the world are and is within your control. And that's what I want people to recognize, is by taking from the experiences of not only myself and others who have been at these high pressure situations, but recognizing that I genetically am another human being that perhaps was a little bit shorter than others, which propelled me in the sport of short track speed skating. But you can do anything. You may not be the next LeBron James, right? But with the right type of dedication, focus, sacrifice, and commitment, you can have truly transformative effects. And what that does for you psychologically is beyond explanation. And that's what I want people to recognize, is how powerful we are as human beings.
So that's amazing. And this has been super fun to hear and listen to you talk about this stuff. I want to, we do have the ability to have questions in the chat window. Before we open those up, I want to ask you one fun question. So one thing that kind of always comes up during Olympic season is these crazy stories about the Olympic Village. And you got to participate in 3 different Olympics. So what was that experience like? And tell us a fun PG story from the
PG story. Oh, look, there is thousands of stories that happen inside the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics. The Olympic Village, so to speak. So the Olympic Village is the one sanctuary where they don't really let cameras in. It's where the athletes live and train and eat. They sleep. Everything is kind of there for them during this period of time. Think of it as like a closed college campus, right? But everyone goes to the cafeteria to eat. And so, okay, here's a story. So there's a moment in time in which 2 things happened. One, every day we would walk into the cafeteria. So sorry, let me just go back for a second. I don't want to get too confused. So the summer, winter are wildly different. Not only is the winter much smaller, there's just less athletes and less staff, etc. It's about 3 times the size. Summer is 3 times the size of winter. So when you go to the summer games, everyone is fit. Everyone is like shredded. Everyone is like these like superhuman athletes walking around at the peak of their condition. In the winter games, you don't know who's who because everyone looks like Eskimos with their outfits on because it's usually super cold in the Olympic Village until you get into the actual cafeteria or until you get into the waiting room that is the pre-holding area before you walk into the opening ceremonies. And so the opening ceremonies, I know I went kind of 2 stories here, but the opening ceremonies is the most powerful because when you walk into this holding room, you have every country with all their athletes around, and everyone, you start to hear these like chants of their own like songs, right? I mean, US athletes like, we are the champions, or like, singing all kinds of things. Everyone collectively is doing this in their own little small groups. That is, I don't think it's ever been recorded anywhere, but I remember that viscerally in 2002, 2006, 2010, hearing those chants and hearing people kind of yelling and screaming. And that is the moment, I think, that is the embodiment of the Olympic Games. That is the story that perhaps is not told, because it is all of these countries from around the world, these thousands of athletes, all under one tent. And they're all singing, they're shaking hands, they're saying hi, they're hugging each other, they're taking pictures. And it's a really beautiful, energetic moment that unless you're there, it's hard. It's like being in a huge concert and then everyone is singing the same song. So everyone's broken up in this tent, everyone's singing all other songs, and then all of a sudden everyone comes together and perhaps sings one solid unification of the human experience song. It seems to be very interesting, even if you don't speak English, right? It's very, very cool.
Amazing. So we do have some questions. We'll start popping them up, and feel free to tackle these audience questions.
Dean Dang, thank you for your question. He asks, have you had a healthy relationship with extrinsic motivations like award and recognition, and how has that relationship changed? Okay, so I'll answer. You have two questions here. And then how did you develop intrinsic motivations in so many areas? So I have not always had a healthy relationship with extrinsic motivation like awards and recognitions. So I think based on society's expectations alone, especially American societies, the old Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last, right? So that is deeply ingrained, that we not only celebrate champions, but we hoist them up on levels that are almost godlike. I don't know if that's healthy for the psyche in the long-term success, because there's so much about the human experience and along this journey that is really the value. It's actually not in winning the gold. And it took me a long time to recognize that although I was hyper-competitive and I wanted to win, the real value in the extrinsic motivation and my relationship with it is in the process. And that's why I say it's always process over the prize. I can't even remember the standing on the podium on many of the Olympic experiences. I don't really remember them. So it's been a relationship that I've recognized that system has tried to condition my brain into thinking after my sport, hey, you're only successful is if you win. How do you win at life? How do you win at business? It's kind of impossible, right? It's an ongoing experience of micro wins and losses and learnings and failures and lessons. That is what we all go through. And how the last part of your question was, I really believe that finding the intrinsic motivations in your personal life don't always and necessarily have to be completely relegated and directed towards your career. So some of you may or may not be in positions that you absolutely love getting up to and grinding on a daily basis, but maybe you're just really, really good at them. Maybe that's your natural strength. Maybe it's the underlying principles that actually excite you and dilate your pupils in a way that make you get up on a day-to-day basis. Or maybe it's something totally different, that this is what you got to do to support yourself, right? And that's all okay. What I would say to you, Dang, is the best way to contain and instigate that fire within is to always find the principles that are the most important to you about your path and your journey. And so what you do is what you do. It's not who you are. So if we played this game and I asked you for 1 minute straight, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? That's all I can ask you. And you respond back to me and you say, hey, I am this title on my business card. This is what I do at Google. I am this. If you instead say, I am these things, that's what you have to concentrate on. So what you do is a part of the facet of the strengths that you have. You can become intrinsically motivated about anything. You just got to find, what are those principles to lean on? What are those levers that really drive you? What are the things that you are and can be transferred into any career path? I hope that makes sense.
Okay, let's pop in another question.
Lindsay asks me, I'm curious about your morning routine. Great. My morning routine now is I wake up quite early. I don't look at my phone. I make sure that that's kind of that is an off position. I make whatever drinks I need to. I usually have a time where I do two things. One, stillness of mind, and two, the physical movement and experience. That seems to help prime me for the day in a way that gives me confidence and a system and a routine that gives me the best possible chance of winning the day. That's my routine in a nutshell. It's usually a combination of some form of sitting meditation, some form of warm beverage, whether it's coffee or tea. And then there's a 3-minute kind of journaling session, either on the computer or actually writing, which I talk about things that I'm the most grateful for. And that seems to kind of give me the smile and the spark that no matter what challenges I'm facing, I'm here and now, and I'm happy to be able to tackle those challenges. Kathy asks, where do I keep my medals? Well, I used to keep them in my sock drawer. I don't even know why, just in a bag. And now I keep them right there. So let me just grab this. So now I keep them. So now I keep these medals kind of on display. This is actually, I started doing this, I think, in February. It was the 10th anniversary of my experience at the games. And I said, man, like, why don't I break these out? And so this is, I don't know if you guys can see that. This is the back of, this is the first gold medal that I had won. This was in Salt Lake City. They're quite heavy. And that's where they are. You know, these are pieces of hardware. Probably to follow up, they're not 100% gold. No, they are plated. But these are memories, right? These are memories. And so the reason why I kept them in my sock drawer was because I just felt like the experience itself was so much more powerful than the medals. The medals is just simply a count. I always wanted to do and be the best in my sport. The medals was a way of keeping track of that metric, but they're important. But I look at the medals and they don't inspire anything other than just memories. And I think that the memories and the lessons is really what I deem to be the most important. So there you go. They're behind me. They're in my home office every day.
So I think we got time for one more question.
Yeah. Oh, Bora Kim, that is an amazing question. So she asks, have you considered the dark side of self-improvement, falling into the optimization rabbit hole, and how do we ensure not falling for this? Oh, that is such a good question, because yes, I have considered the dark side of self-improvement. It is a very addictive path and process. And I have fallen and I've succumbed to that time and time again. And so that's where the power of gratitude really lies, right? Gratitude gives you a chance to be here and now, to recognize that you are present, that you won't win everything, that you are not a machine, you are not a robot, you are a part of this personalized, unique human experience. And that seems to be my cornerstone for everything that happens in my life. I am eternally an optimistic person, and I eternally believe that human beings can evolve and revolutionize and become incredible, beautiful creatures beyond what we are already. And there is a dark side to becoming so obsessed with self-improvement. That dark side was when I was an Olympic athlete, when I was training on a day-to-day basis. I had this conversation with a very close friend of mine last night, and we both came to an agreement that there's certain athletes who become so obsessed with their own personal growth and career path that it can actually become very psychologically detrimental. And I was in that cage for many, many years where I cared about nothing and no one else except for winning and being my absolute best. And it consumed me in ways that also helped produce incredible results. But psychologically, it was not the most healthy of atmospheres to be in. And so what I've learned from that is that the dark side that all human beings have can be used as a lever, whether it's insecurities, self-doubt, fear, rage, anger. If you use it in a positive propelling motion in sporadic times, it's very powerful. but you are not only that one side. We are all unique gemstones and diamonds in this world. And it's up to you to uncover and polish those other facets of your personality to help balance this out. It's very challenging. Right? I also am challenged by this on an ongoing basis. And I think the best way to overcome and falling into that rabbit hole of, kind of self-audit and analysis and paralysis is to recognize that you are here for a short amount of time. And what can you do to ensure that you are doing things that really enhance your happiness and fulfillment, while also understanding that life is not all peaches and cream. And the reasons why we can taste sweet is because we also taste the sour and salty. And it's that dichotomy and that balance that is the ever so most prioritized and important aspect of living in this life. So I hope that gives you some insight. I think it's really, whether if you have an obsessive personality naturally, or if you're always constantly looking at improving, at some point you have to just say, hey, you know what? I am here right now, and I'm just going to enjoy being in this moment, whatever that moment is, and recognize that it's not going to be stagnant. There's always going to be kind of movement, changing for good or for bad, and just living in this experience. I hope that answers your question.
We're actually going to do one more question because I want us to come full circle. This is actually what I asked you before we started the live stream. So here's the last question for you.
Penny asks, what books are on the bookshelf behind you? So I've got many books here. I've got things all the way that go from construction, real estate funding to books about Buddhism and meditation, consciousness medicine. I've got books, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. I've got books by Terence McKenna, Food of the Gods. If you know what I'm talking about, then you probably know. And then the book that I'm reading right now is called Behave by Robert Sapolsky. I find this to be a truly fascinating read. And I think the reason why it's so fascinating is because we are hardwired as human beings because of the conditions that we have gone throughout the kind of thousands and millions of years of being in existence. And those hardwired code DNAs are in us. The reason why I read books like that is because I want to understand how I don't have to be what I think that I am. I don't have to stay fixed, that I can improve. And so I myself faced a lot of insecurities and fear around losing when I was competing as an athlete. And into my personal life, that has bled into great decision-making and bad decision-making. And what I would like to do is have a better process that I'm making decisions that will greatly enhance the limited time that I have on earth. That also gives me a chance to spend time with people, strangers and families, to help them recognize that they also have limited time on earth, and to look at it in a way that there's beauty in all things. You have to open your eyes and see them, and your strength really relies in your ability to perceive and react in ways that you didn't think were possible. And so while you may be hardwired in your DNA or code, or some micro trauma has happened in your life, and that's why the way that you are, that's just why that way that, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in your interpersonal politics at work, whatever it is, these are real and these things are natural. They're about who you are and why you behave the way that you do, but you don't have to succumb to them, and you can change that in a positive way. And it takes time and energy, and that power is in each and every single one of you. So I hope that you guys can take from that and recognize, hey, man, I think I've been in the passenger seat, and it's time for me to scoot on over, get into that driver's seat, and take back control over the things that I have, and be able to say, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to do something about this bad habit, or this decision, or this underlying goal that I've had for 10 years that I haven't pursued.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Apollo, for joining us and sharing your story. This has been incredible to hear you share.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate the time.
And thanks everyone for watching.